They told you who you are before you ever discovered it yourself. They gave you names, opinions, and judgments long before you could even speak your truth. And most of you believed it. They said you were not enough, not smart enough, not gifted enough, not worthy enough. And somewhere along the line, you wore that label like a badge. But what if I told you that the label you've been wearing all your life is lying to you? See, the danger is not in what people call you, but in what you start answering to. The real prison is not built with walls and bars. It's built with labels. And most people are walking around imprisoned by someone else's opinion. Listen to me. Just because they called you a failure doesn't mean you failed. Just because they called you broken doesn't mean you are beyond repair. Just because they labeled you average doesn't mean you are not extraordinary. The label is lying. And the longer you believe it, the further you drift from the truth of who you were created to be. Many people live their entire lives trying to prove the label wrong, instead of living to reveal their true identity. They fight shadows, they chase validation. They lose years trying to convince people who never had the authority to define them in the first place. The problem isn't what they said. It's that you gave it power. Your destiny was never supposed to be measured by their definition of you. Some of the most powerful people in history were mislabeled before they rose. They were mocked, doubted, rejected, underestimated. But their identity wasn't built on what people said. It was built on what they knew within themselves. You don't need the world's permission to become who you already are. You don't need their validation to activate your greatness. The label they gave you might describe your past, but it does not define your future. If you want to know your true identity, you must silence the noise around you and listen to the whisper within. Because the real you is not what the world sees, it's what your spirit knows. You are not your mistakes. You are not your past. You are not your failures. You are potential wrapped in imperfection, waiting for courage to unwrap it. Every label has a purpose: to limit you, to box you in, to make you predictable. That's why you've got to tear it off before it hardens into identity. When they call you weak, rise stronger. When they call you nothing, build something. When they call you lost, show them you were just being prepared for direction. Don't let your label tell your story. Because the greatest tragedy in life is not death. It's living under a false name. Dying never having met your real self. Labels create invisible prisons. Every day, someone out there is living inside a cell built by the words of others. The walls aren't made of steel or stone. They're made of opinions, of judgments, of careless comments spoken in moments of ignorance. It starts early. Maybe it was a teacher who said, "You'll never amount to much." Maybe it was a parent who compared you to someone else. Maybe it was a friend who laughed when you dared to dream. And you didn't know it then, but that moment planted a seed of doubt deep inside you. That seed grew roots, and those roots became bars. Now you move through life limited, confined by something that was never true in the first place. Think about it. How many times have you held yourself back because of what someone once said about you? How many dreams have you buried because someone made you feel unworthy? That's how invisible prisons work. You don't see them, but you feel them every time you hesitate, every time you shrink when you should rise, every time you say, "I can't," before even trying. You are not trapped by your ability. You are trapped by belief. The belief that their opinion was the truth. Words have power. When spoken often enough, they become labels. And when labels are repeated long enough, they become identities. Someone calls you lazy, and over time you stop trying. Someone says you're too old, and you stop starting. Someone says you're not beautiful, and you stop looking in the mirror with pride. These are not truths. They are mental cages disguised as facts. But because you accepted them, you live them. You can't rise above the labels you keep answering to. The world has a way of assigning names to your struggle, but your mistake is thinking the name is final. You are not the failure. You simply failed once. You are not the single parent who couldn't make it. You are the warrior who's still standing when life tried to break you. You are not the quiet one who won't succeed. You are the thinker, the observer, the one who notices what others ignore. The problem is never the label. The problem is when you let the label define your limits. Life is full of people who will try to tell you who you are. They'll see your mistakes and name you after them. They'll see your scars and call you broken. They'll see your delay and call you done. But they don't see your story. They only see a snapshot. And if you let a snapshot define your entire movie, you'll live a life that never moves beyond that one frame. There's a story of a young man who was told he wasn't smart enough to study. His teachers said he would never amount to anything. So he stopped believing in himself. He got small jobs, hid his ideas, and lived quietly. One day he read about people who achieved greatness despite rejection. Something shifted. He realized the label wasn't his truth. It was someone else's limitation projected onto him. He started studying again, working hard, and years later became a successful engineer. The only thing that changed was his belief. The moment he stopped believing the label, the walls fell down. Your invisible prison will only disappear when you stop agreeing with your captor. Every time you say, maybe they're right, you're tightening the chains. But every time you say, they don't define me, you're taking back the key. The first step to freedom is awareness, realizing that the voice in your head saying, you can't, is not your own voice. It's an echo of someone else's fear. So many people are walking around with potential locked inside them. They think they're free, but they're not. They wake up every morning, go to work, scroll through social media, laugh, smile, and talk. Yet inside, they're caged. Caged by insecurity, caged by what someone said 10 years ago, caged by failure that has already expired. And they don't even know the door is open. One of the most dangerous prisons is comfort. When you accept your label, you stop fighting, you stop stretching, you stop discovering. You settle for less than you deserve because the label has convinced you that less is all you'll ever have. But the truth is, you are only confined by the limits of your belief. Every time you doubt yourself, remember that doubt was taught. No child is born thinking they're not enough. The world told you that, and you believed it. But if you can learn doubt, you can unlearn it. If you can wear a label, you can remove it. And when you do, you'll realize you were never trapped. You were just sitting in a cage whose door was never locked. Freedom doesn't begin when circumstances change. It begins when your mind changes. It begins when you say, they called me this, but I know who I am. When you stop rehearsing the lies and start rewriting your truth, people may still talk, they may still judge, they may still throw labels your way. But their words will fall powerless against someone who knows their worth. So look at your life today and ask yourself, what label have I been living under? Who told me I wasn't enough, and why did I believe them? Because once you start questioning the label, it starts losing power. Every time you remind yourself of who you really are, a piece of that invisible wall crumbles. And before you know it, you're standing outside the prison that never truly existed, free, confident, and unshaken. The danger lies in what you answer to. Life will always have people who talk, people who whisper, people who label. You cannot stop them from speaking, but you can stop yourself from responding. The real danger is not what they call you. It's what you start believing about yourself when they call you that. The words they use are powerless until you accept them. When you start answering to those names, when you start shaping your identity around those opinions, you begin to shrink into a version of yourself that was never meant to exist. Every single day, people are destroyed not by what others say, but by what they start to believe after hearing it. A person can be called a failure 100 times, but the moment they answer to it, they become it. Someone can be called ugly, stupid, unworthy. Those are just sounds until your heart starts echoing them back. The truth is, the world will always name you based on what it sees, but what it sees is not always who you are. Think about it. A diamond in the dirt is still a diamond. It doesn't lose its value just because it's covered in dust. But imagine if the diamond started believing it was just a rock because it was surrounded by dirt. That's what happens when you answer to the wrong labels. You start lowering your worth because you've let your environment redefine your value. In school, maybe you were told you weren't smart enough, and you believed it. So you stopped trying. You stopped raising your hand. You stopped dreaming big. And now, years later, you still carry that voice in your head that says, I can. But what if that teacher was wrong? What if their words had nothing to do with your ability and everything to do with their limited understanding of your potential? The moment you believe them, you built a wall inside your own mind. Many people lose their power because they start living by the labels others placed on them. Someone called them weak, and they became afraid to be strong. Someone called them soft, and they began to harden their heart. Someone called them broken, and they stopped trying to heal. You see, the label is not the problem. your agreement with it is. You can't control the words they speak, but you can control the names you answer to. There was a woman who always dreamed of being a painter. Her friends laughed at her. They said art was a hobby, not a career. Every time she picked up a brush, she heard their voices in her head. You're wasting your time, they said. So she stopped painting. Years later, she walked through a gallery and saw a painting that looked almost like one she had once created. It was selling for thousands of dollars. That's when she realized the only thing that stopped her was not their words. It was that she believed them. She answered to the wrong voice. The danger lies in what you give power to. When someone calls you unworthy and you agree, you become your own enemy. When life tells you you can't, and you whisper back, maybe I can't, you surrender before the battle begins. You must understand that silence is not weakness. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is refuse to respond. Don't fight their label with words. Prove it wrong with your life. You can walk into a room full of opinions, but if you know who you are, none of them can touch you. They might say you're too late, but you'll keep walking. They might say you're not capable, but you'll keep building. They might say you're dreaming too big, but you'll keep seeing what they cannot see. When you stop answering to small voices, you make space for your destiny to speak louder. In everyday life, we answer to so many false names. The world says you're average, and you agree. The world says you're replaceable, and you agree. But the truth is, you were never meant to fit in. You were meant to stand out. The moment you start defining yourself by what you know instead of what they say, your entire life begins to change. Imagine a phone ringing. If it's not your number, you don't answer it. The same principle applies to life. If the words being spoken don't belong to your truth, stop answering them. Not every criticism deserves your attention. Not every insult deserves your reaction. Sometimes silence is the loudest declaration of strength. There are people who will call you selfish for choosing peace. They will call you arrogant for believing in yourself. They will call you stubborn for chasing your dreams. And that's fine. Let them talk. You don't owe anyone an explanation for knowing your worth. Remember, when you stop answering to what they call you, you start hearing who you really are. Many of the greatest people in history were called things they never answered to. They were called crazy, unfit, unrealistic, impossible. But they didn't answer. They kept walking, kept believing, kept building. And eventually the same people who mocked them started calling them geniuses. That's the power of silence. When you don't answer to the wrong voices, life will eventually speak the truth for you. Every time you let someone's opinion define your reaction, you give them control. Every time you let their voice silence your own, you trade your identity for their approval. The only way to break that cycle is to stop answering. You don't have to argue. You don't have to explain. You just have to keep walking in the direction of your vision, no matter what they say. So when they call you a failure, don't answer. When they call you a dreamer, don't defend yourself. When they call you delusional, keep working in silence. Because one day, your results will speak for you in a language they can't deny. Your greatest power is not in proving them wrong. It's in refusing to let them define what's right about you. The world will always talk, but you decide which voices become your truth. The danger lies not in the noise around you, but in the echo you allow inside your heart. Because once you start answering to the wrong name, you start living the wrong life. Silence their lies with your focus. Replace their labels with your actions. And remember, what they call you doesn't change your worth, but what you answer to can change your destiny forever. Labels are meant to limit. They are designed to keep you small, to make sure you never step into the full measure of your potential. From the moment you start dreaming, the world begins measuring you by its standards, setting invisible boundaries around what you can be, what you can do, and how far you can go. Every label you accept becomes a fence built around your destiny. It's like someone drawing a circle around your feet and telling you never to move beyond it. The sad part is that most people never try to cross that line because they've been conditioned to believe that's all they are capable of. Think about it. How many times have you stopped yourself because someone said, that's not realistic? How many dreams have you buried because the world told you it wasn't possible? Labels are not given to describe your reality. They are created to define your limits before you even try. When people can't understand your vision, they label you to contain it. They call you too ambitious because your hunger makes them uncomfortable. They call you different because your light makes them insecure. They call you difficult because you refuse to settle. A label's purpose is control. Society doesn't fear failure. It fears individuals who refuse to be defined by it. When you start tearing off the labels, you become unpredictable. And that's what scares people, because you no longer fit into their box. They called you lazy because they didn't understand your process. They called you arrogant because you started believing in yourself. They called you lost because you stopped following their direction. But none of that was truth. It was an attempt to shrink your identity so they could remain comfortable in their own. Think of a lion in a cage. It still has power, it still has strength, it still has dominance. But inside that cage, it doesn't roar. It paces quietly, trained by confinement. That's what labels do to the human spirit. They tame it. They make you forget that you were born with something wild, something limitless, something uncontainable. Every time someone tells you, stay in your lane, they are really saying, don't discover how powerful you could become. You see it every day. A child loves to draw, but someone says, you can't make a living out of that. And the pencil is put down forever. A teenager dreams of being an athlete, but they're told, you're not built for it. And the dream dies before it ever breathes. An adult wants to start a business, but hears, that's risky, and returns to the safety of routine. The label wins every time it's believed. But the truth is, labels are nothing more than the limits of another person's imagination. When someone tells you what you can't do, they're really saying, I can't see myself doing it. They project their boundaries onto you and call it advice. But you were not designed to live by their limits. The moment you believe that your worth is greater than their opinion, the label loses power. A young woman once told her story about how everyone in her family said she would never succeed because she wasn't good in school. They called her average, unmotivated, a dreamer without discipline. She believed it for years. Then one day she realized those labels were just opinions, not prophecies. She started learning again at her own pace, in her own way. She built a small business from home, then expanded, then employed others. Years later, the same people who called her lazy were asking her for opportunities. She didn't change who she was. She just stopped letting their labels define her limits. The reason labels are so dangerous is because they sound logical. They come from authority figures, friends, parents, bosses, teachers, people you respect. And because you trust them, their words dig deeper. But even the most trusted voices can be wrong about your purpose. A label can only describe where you are, not where you're going. When someone says, you'll never make it, what they mean is, I can't imagine you making it. That's not your problem. That's their vision issue, not your destiny issue. Look around you. Every person who achieved greatness had to outgrow a label. They were told they weren't talented enough, disciplined enough, or smart enough. They were told they were crazy for dreaming that big. But they understood something powerful. That labels are just suggestions, not sentences. You can't stop people from labeling you, but you can refuse to wear what doesn't fit your purpose. In your daily life, labels are everywhere. You might be at work where someone calls you the quiet one, and so you stop speaking up in meetings. Someone calls you the emotional one, and you stop showing passion. Someone says you're too young, and you stop leading. That's how labels win, not by being true, but by convincing you to stop trying. The only way to break them is by acting against them. Every time you take a step they said you couldn't, you weaken the power of that label. People fear what they can't categorize. That's why when you start breaking limits, they panic. You stop fitting their definition, and it frustrates them. But remember, you were never born to fit, you were born to expand. Every time you grow, you make someone else's box look smaller. That's why it's easier for them to label you than to elevate themselves. The moment you decide that your potential is not up for debate, you take back your power. You realize that the label they gave you was never about you. It was about control. Because once you know who you are, no one can limit you. And once you start believing that your dreams are valid, their definitions no longer hold weight. In everyday life, there are people walking around carrying invisible tags that say, not enough, too late, too broken, too small. But if they only knew how powerful they really are, they would tear those tags off in an instant. The truth is, your potential doesn't need permission. It only needs your decision. When you decide to rise above the label, you begin to see life differently. You stop asking for approval. You stop explaining your choices. You stop apologizing for being more than what they expected. The label is meant to limit, but the mind that refuses to bow to it becomes unstoppable. People will still talk, they will still label, they will still misunderstand. But the moment you stop living by their boundaries, you start discovering how limitless you truly are. Most people live reacting, not revealing. They live their whole lives trying to respond to the opinions of others, to prove something, to silence voices that should have never mattered in the first place. They move like puppets pulled by invisible strings of judgment, chasing approval that never satisfies. They spend their days thinking, I'll show them, I'll prove them wrong. But the truth is, even when they do prove them wrong, they still lose, because they never proved themselves right. You see, life is not supposed to be a reaction, it's supposed to be a revelation. You weren't born to live on defense, you were born to live on purpose. Yet so many people are driven by the need to answer critics rather than answer their calling. Someone said you can't do it, so you try to. Someone said you're not enough, so you exhaust yourself trying to be. Someone laughed at your dream, and now your life's mission is to show them it's possible. But in the process, you forget why you started. You forget who you are beyond the noise. When you live reacting, you let others set the temperature of your life. They decide when you're angry, when you're motivated, when you're discouraged. You become a reflection of their expectations instead of the revelation of your own potential. Imagine living in a house where every time someone knocks on the door, you drop everything to answer, no matter what you were doing. That's how most people live, always answering, never building. Every comment, every insult, every rejection becomes a knock that steals focus and drains energy. But when you live revealing, you stop reacting to their noise because you're too busy becoming who you were meant to be. Revealing is about unfolding what's already inside you. It's about allowing your gifts, your ideas, your purpose to shine without needing permission or validation. When you live revealing, you understand that your light doesn't need to compete with the darkness. It just needs to shine. Think about daily life. Someone criticizes your career choice, and immediately you feel the need to defend it. Someone doubts your goals, and you feel pressure to perform. Someone says you're wasting your time, and suddenly you begin to question your journey. That's what reacting does. It keeps you stuck in a cycle of explanation. But when you live revealing, you don't explain yourself, you express yourself. Your success becomes your response. Your growth becomes your proof. Your peace becomes your loudest statement. There was once a man who grew up being told he would never achieve anything great. His teacher said he wasn't smart enough. His friends laughed at his dreams, and even his family doubted his ability to make something of himself. For years, he carried those voices like weights. Everything he did was to prove them wrong. He worked harder, stayed up longer, and achieved more than most. But even when he succeeded, there was no peace because his motivation was still reaction. He was living to silence others instead of listening to himself. It wasn't until he stopped trying to prove them wrong that he finally started to prove himself right. He realized the real victory was not in their recognition, but in his revelation. Many people confuse movement with purpose. They're busy but not becoming. They're working but not growing. They're reacting, not revealing. And when your life becomes a reaction, you lose control of your direction. You start going where the noise pushes you instead of where your heart calls you. You can see it everywhere. People buy things they don't need to impress people they don't like. They choose careers not because they're passionate, but because they want to be respected. They chase validation on social media, counting likes instead of living life. That's not purpose, that's performance. And performance is exhausting because the audience always changes. Living revealing means you stop performing for others and start becoming for yourself. It means you stop chasing applause and start chasing authenticity. When you live revealing, you are not moved by rejection because your worth is not tied to reaction. Rejection becomes redirection. Failure becomes formation. Criticism becomes confirmation that you are on a path worth noticing. Most people die never knowing who they truly are because they were too busy reacting to who others said they were. They lived to fit expectations, not to fulfill potential. They fought battles that didn't matter, all while ignoring the quiet voice inside that said, "This is who you are." The moment you stop reacting to the world is the moment you start revealing to it. Your peace becomes your protest. Your growth becomes your greatest statement. You no longer waste time trying to prove your value. You just live it. When someone doubts you, you don't argue, you create. When someone mocks you, you don't explain, you elevate. When someone underestimates you, you don't react, you reveal. In daily life, you can test this truth. When someone tries to provoke you, remain still. When they gossip, stay silent. When they doubt you, keep building. Because revelation always outlasts reaction. The world eventually sees what was always hidden inside you. Not because you shouted, but because you shined. Living reacting means you let the outside world define your mood. Living revealing means your inside world defines your movement. It's about shifting from external control to internal conviction. It's realizing that you don't need to fight for recognition when you were born for revelation. Your existence itself is proof that something divine wanted to express itself uniquely through you. When you live reacting, you live temporary. When you live revealing, you live timeless. Every great person learned to quiet the noise long enough to hear their own rhythm. They learned that the world's opinion changes daily, but purpose doesn't. They discovered that the only voice that truly matters is the one that whispers inside, keep going. Most people are chasing applause when they should be chasing alignment. They are seeking validation when they should be seeking vision. When you live revealing, you realize your power was never in what they thought about you. It was in what you thought about yourself. Because once you know who you are, no one's doubt can move you, no label can limit you, and no rejection can define you. And that's when the shift happens. When you stop reacting to their noise and start revealing your truth, you become unstoppable. People start seeing what was always there but hidden beneath years of proving, pleasing and pretending. You stop explaining and start existing. You stop defending and start defining. And the moment you live revealing, you no longer need to be understood. You just need to be undeniable. You are not what they named you. You are not the sum of their opinions, not the reflection of their misunderstanding, not the result of their judgment. You are more, so much more than what people decided you were. But the tragedy is that most people spend their lives believing the names given to them by others, names that were never meant to stick, words that were spoken in ignorance or pain. You are not what they called you in anger. You are not what they whispered when you failed. You are not the nickname of your mistake or the label of your past. Every human being is born pure, limitless, untouched by the opinions of others. But somewhere along the way, someone said something, a parent, a teacher, a friend, and it cut deep. It planted a lie in the soil of your identity. They said you were average, and you believed them. They said you were slow, and you stopped trying. They said you were unworthy, and you started apologizing for existing. That's how it happens, slowly, quietly, until one day you wake up living a life that fits their words, not your truth. There was a boy who grew up being told he was stupid. Every time he brought home a report card, his father compared him to his siblings. He started believing the words. He stopped raising his hand in class, stopped asking questions, stopped dreaming big. Years later, he was working a job he hated, always feeling like he wasn't enough. Then one day, a coworker said something that changed everything. She said, "You're not stupid. You just never believed you were smart." That night he sat alone, realizing he had been living under a name that was never his. He decided to learn again, to try again, and with every small success, he tore off the labels one by one. That's how life changes. When you realize you don't have to answer to the name they gave you. Names carry energy. They can either cage you or call you higher. Some names are meant to describe your behavior at a moment in time, but not define your being. When they called you lazy, maybe you were tired. When they called you failure, maybe you were just in training. When they called you weak, maybe you were healing. But instead of outgrowing the season, you accepted the name as identity. Think about it. When a sculptor looks at a block of marble, he doesn't see stone, he sees a masterpiece. But if the marble could speak, it might say, "I'm just a rock, rough and unshaped." Yet the sculptor knows what's hidden within. That's you. You've been named by people who saw your rough edges, but not your masterpiece. They looked at your current shape and forgot you were still being carved by time, pressure, and persistence. In daily life, people are quick to name others because it gives them comfort. It's easier to label you than to understand you. It's easier to define you than to accept that they don't fully know your story. So they call you emotional when you care deeply, dramatic when you express yourself, cold when you protect your peace, and proud when you start loving yourself. But their labels say more about their perspective than your identity. You are not what they named you, because their naming was based on their limited vision. They saw a fragment and assumed the whole, but the person you are becoming is far greater than the person they perceived. When someone calls you a name that doesn't match your spirit, you don't have to defend yourself. You just have to keep evolving. Evolution is the loudest correction to false identification. Maybe people called you a failure because they saw you fall. But falling is not failure, it's movement. It means you tried, it means you stepped out. Failure is not falling down, it's staying down. And every time you rise, you prove that their name for you doesn't belong to you. Think about how many people in history were called something they were not. They were named by their surroundings but defined by their purpose. They were mocked, doubted, rejected. But they didn't answer to those names. They kept walking, kept building, kept believing. The same crowd that once called them crazy later called them genius. The same people who said, "You'll never make it," ended up saying, "I always knew you would." The truth didn't change. Only the label did. You are not what they named you when they were angry. You are not what they called you when they were hurt. You are not the product of their misunderstanding of your process. Sometimes people label you because your growth offends their stagnation. They can't understand how you can rise after everything you've been through, so they call you fake. They can't comprehend your peace after your pain, so they call you heartless. But that's not your burden to carry. That's their confusion to resolve. When you start to rise above their definitions, they'll try to pull you back by reminding you of who you used to be. They'll say, "Don't forget where you came from," as if your past disqualifies your progress. But you can remember your past without being imprisoned by it. Your past is not your identity. It's your education. It's the evidence of your survival, not the limitation of your future. In your everyday life, you might feel the weight of old names following you. Names like failure, unworthy, broken, lost. But those names only have power if you keep answering to them. The moment you say, "That's not me anymore," you begin to rewrite your story. You start seeing yourself not as others described you, but as you truly are, capable, evolving, powerful. A woman once said she spent years believing she was invisible. No one saw her, no one appreciated her, until one day she decided to see herself. She started treating herself like she mattered even before anyone else did. And slowly, people began to notice. Not because she changed who she was, but because she stopped answering to invisibility. She didn't become visible by their validation. She became visible by her realization. You are not what they named you, because names can't define essence. A label can describe behavior, but it cannot touch identity. You are not who they said you were in your weakest moment. You are not the story they told about you when you couldn't defend yourself. You are more than their opinion, more than their memory of you, more than their misunderstanding. And every day you choose to believe in yourself, every day you walk in self-awareness, you break another chain of false identity. Because you are not what they named you. You are everything they could never see. Identity is not something the world gives you. It's something you discover deep within yourself. It's not a title, not a position, not the clothes you wear, not the car you drive, not even the applause or the criticism of people around you. Identity is the quiet knowing inside your soul that says, "This is who I am," even when no one is watching. Too many people spend their lives chasing external approval, thinking if they just achieve enough, if they just earn enough, if they just look good enough, they will finally feel whole. But the truth is, external validation is a fragile foundation. The moment the applause stops, so does your confidence. When people stop cheering, you start doubting. That's because your sense of worth was built on the shifting sand of their opinions, not the solid rock of your inner truth. Think about this. A diamond doesn't ask to be called valuable. It simply is. Whether it's buried in the earth or sitting in a royal crown, it's still a diamond. Its worth doesn't change based on where it's found or who recognizes it. But human beings forget that truth. We think our surroundings define our shine. We think if people can't see our value, it means we don't have any. But diamonds aren't made to be understood by everyone. Their brilliance is revealed only under pressure and light. And just like that diamond, your identity was formed under pressure, shaped by struggle, refined by resilience. Every day, People wake up wearing masks, not because they enjoy pretending, but because they've been taught that who they are is not enough. They smile when they want to cry, agree when they want to disagree, shrink when they want to shine. They live according to what others expect, afraid that being authentic will cost them acceptance. But the greatest tragedy is not rejection, it's self-abandonment. When you betray who you truly are just to be liked, you lose the only person who could ever bring you peace yourself. You see, the world teaches us to measure our worth through comparison. If someone has more followers, they must be better. If someone drives a nicer car, they must be more successful. If someone's life looks perfect on social media, they must be happier. But none of that is real. What you see on the surface is often an illusion. Identity is not the image, it's the essence. It's not how loud you are in the crowd, it's how honest you are when you're alone. There's a man who once told me he spent years trying to impress people who didn't even like him. He worked long hours, bought expensive things, and exhausted himself trying to prove he was somebody. One night, he said, I realized I was chasing shadows. I kept trying to become what they admired, but I didn't even admire myself. That realization changed him. He stopped performing and started living. He stopped asking, what will they think? And started asking, what do I believe? He found peace not in what he had, but in who he became. The truth is, you can't find your identity in other people because they're all searching for theirs too. One day they'll lift you up, the next day they'll tear you down. Opinions change like weather, but your essence was built for all seasons. When you know who you are, you stop needing validation from the outside world. You become grounded, unshakable, like a tree with deep roots. Storms may bend your branches, but they can't uproot you because your stability doesn't depend on external calm. It's anchored in internal certainty. In daily life, you can see people who forgot who they are. The student who hides their creativity because others laugh at it. The employee who never speaks up because they fear rejection. The dreamer who gave up because someone said, that's impossible. And then there are those rare individuals who walk differently. They don't follow trends, they set them. They don't chase attention. They attract it through authenticity. They are the ones who live from the inside out. Their peace doesn't come from approval, but from alignment. When your identity is internal, rejection doesn't destroy you. It refines you. Criticism doesn't crush you. It sharpens you. Failure doesn't define you. It teaches you. Because your worth is not up for debate. It's already established. You stop living to please and start living to purpose. You were created with a specific design, a unique fingerprint, a one-of-a-kind voice. Yet most people spend their whole lives trying to sound like everyone else. But true power begins the moment you stop imitating and start embracing. The world doesn't need another copy. It needs your original. Every person you admire became great not by fitting in, but by standing out. They stopped chasing acceptance and started living authenticity. Look around. The tree doesn't envy the sky. The ocean doesn't compare itself to the mountain. And the sun doesn't apologize for shining too brightly. Everything in nature exists confidently in its identity. Yet humans, the most intelligent creation of all, constantly question their worth. You were never meant to blend in. You were meant to stand out. So when you walk into a room, walk with the awareness that your value entered with you. You don't need a title to be significant. You don't need wealth to feel rich. You don't need applause to prove your importance. Identity is quiet power. It doesn't need to shout, it just is. When you know who you are, you stop negotiating your worth with people who don't even know themselves. And that's the secret. Identity is internal, not external. It's the voice inside that whispers truth even when the world screams lies. It's the calm in the chaos, the certainty in confusion, the strength in stillness. When your identity comes from within, you become untouchable, not because life stops being hard, but because your sense of self no longer depends on what happens outside. When you realize that the world can label you anything it wants, but it can never define who you are. The label is lying about your potential. Every negative word that has been spoken over you was never a mirror of truth. It was a shadow cast by someone else's fear. People will look at your beginnings and try to predict your ending. They will see your weakness and decide your worth. They will watch you stumble and conclude that you were never meant to run. But the label they place on you doesn't define you. It just reveals how limited their vision is. Your potential is far greater than the opinions wrapped around your name. Imagine a seed buried deep in the soil. From the outside, it looks dead, forgotten, useless. If someone walks past that soil, they might think there's nothing valuable beneath it. But give it time, and that small seed will break through the dirt and reach toward the sky. That's what your potential is like. Hidden, silent, underestimated. People label you based on what they can see above the surface, but they have no idea what's growing underneath. Just because your greatness isn't visible yet doesn't mean it's not alive. Every negative word you've heard in your life was never the truth. It was just an illusion trying to cover your strength. When someone calls you a failure, it's not because you are one. It's because they're uncomfortable seeing someone still fighting after falling. When they call you too late, too old, too slow, it's because they stopped believing in their own timing. Their words aren't describing you, they're exposing their own limitations. There's a man who was told all his life that he'd never amount to anything. Teachers said he wasn't smart enough. Friends laughed at his dreams. Even his family told him to be realistic. So he stopped talking about his goals, but deep inside, a quiet fire kept burning. He worked in silence, studied at night, failed 100 times, but refused to give up. Years later, when he finally succeeded, the same people who called him a fool called him a genius. Nothing about him had changed except one thing: their label. That's how it works. When you prove your potential, people change their words. Not because they suddenly believe in you, but because your success made their doubt look foolish. The world is full of labels: lazy, average, broken, unqualified, too emotional, not enough. These words stick to people's hearts like glue until they start believing them. But a label is only powerful if you accept it. The moment you say, "That's not who I am," you take back your authority. When someone tries to define you by your past, remind yourself that your potential is written in the future. When they call you a failure, remember that even failure is just a disguise that success wears while it's under construction. Think about the story of a butterfly. Before it flies, it's just a crawling caterpillar, easily crushed, easily ignored. Most people would never imagine that something so small could become something so beautiful. But the caterpillar doesn't argue with the label. It goes into the cocoon, disappears from sight, and transforms in silence. That's what potential does. It works in secret while the world is busy judging the process. And one day, you'll spread your wings, and the same people who laughed at you will stare in awe, wondering how you did it. Every person you admire today once carried a label. Someone told them they couldn't do it, and they believed it for a while, until they decided not to. Potential doesn't need permission to exist. It just needs courage to emerge. And courage doesn't mean you never doubt yourself. It means you move even when the labels scream in your ear. Every step you take toward your purpose tears off another lie. In daily life, you can see how easily people get trapped by false labels. A child who's told they're not good at math stops trying. A woman who's told she's not beautiful hides her light. A man who's told he'll never succeed settles for less. They shrink their lives to fit into words that were never true. But there's something powerful about the moment you decide to rewrite your definition. When you start saying, "I am capable," or "I am worthy," "I am becoming," you shift the atmosphere around you. The lies lose their power because truth has entered the room. You must remember that potential is not visible in the early stages. Greatness rarely looks like greatness when it's just beginning. The painter's first strokes look messy. The writer's first words sound weak. The dreamer's first steps look clumsy. But every masterpiece starts in chaos. Every success story starts with doubt. And every powerful person you've ever heard of had to walk through a season where nobody believed in them. The label said ordinary, but the truth said extraordinary. There's a young woman who once dreamed of starting a business. Everyone around her said it was impossible. They laughed at her, told her she didn't have the resources, the connections, the experience. For years, she believed them. She worked small jobs, watching her dream fade away. One day, she realized she was living under their label, not her own. She decided to start with what she had: a single laptop and an idea. It was slow at first, hard and lonely, but she kept going. Now, that same business employs hundreds of people. When asked what changed, she said, "I stopped believing their labels and started believing my potential." That's the secret most people miss. Your potential doesn't need validation, it needs activation. It's like fire hidden in wood. You can stare at it and call it cold, but the flame is still there, waiting for friction. Your struggles, your setbacks, your pain, they're not proof of your limits. They're the friction that awakens your fire. The label says you're stuck, but the truth says you're preparing. Sometimes life will push you into situations that look like endings, but they're actually beginnings. People will misjudge your silence as weakness, your patience as fear, your failures as proof that you've reached your limit. But your potential is not measured by how things look. It's measured by what's alive inside you. And if you still have breath, if you still have a dream, if you still have a spark, then your story is not over. So when you hear negative words spoken about you, don't absorb them, observe them. Understand that those labels are reflections of someone else's blindness, not your identity. They cannot see what's in you because they're too busy staring at what's around you. They only see the present version of you, but they don't know what's being formed inside your struggle. Your potential is not waiting for their approval, it's waiting for your belief. Because every negative word ever spoken over you is just a lie, and every lie loses its power the moment you decide to believe in your truth. Power begins when you tear off the label. That single moment when you decide, I'm done being what they called me, that's when your real life starts. For years you might have worn the name others gave you. Failure, too much, not enough, weak, unworthy. And you wore it like it was stitched into your skin. Every decision, every thought, every step you took was filtered through that false identity. But there comes a day when the weight of pretending becomes heavier than the risk of being real. And in that moment, when you rip the label off, you awaken the version of yourself that was always waiting underneath. The world teaches you to accept names that limit you. People label what they don't understand because it's easier to name you than to know you. They see your struggle and call it defeat. They see your silence and call it weakness. They see your uniqueness and call it strange. But their perception is not your truth. The moment you start believing their words, you hand them the power that was meant to belong to you. But when you tear off the label, you take that power back. Think of a jar sitting on a shelf. On the outside it says cheap. So people walk by it, never looking inside. They assume it's of little value. But what if inside that jar was gold dust? The label deceived them and the treasure was missed. That's how life works. People judge you by what they see, not by what you carry. But when you remove the wrong label, the value inside starts to shine. Power doesn't come from pretending to be someone else. It comes from standing boldly in who you are. Real growth starts the day you stop trying to meet expectations that were never yours to fulfill. Someone once said, you can't become who you are meant to be while trying to remain who others think you should be. That's truth. Because the moment you chase approval, you chain yourself to limitation. You were not born to be accepted by everyone. You were born to become undeniable. Every great person you admire had to tear off a label before they rose. Someone told them they couldn't do it, that they weren't good enough, that they didn't have what it takes. But instead of accepting it, they decided to rewrite their name. They said, I am not who you say I am. They chose to see themselves through vision, not opinion. And the world eventually had to adjust its description of them. Picture a young man working at a small store, labeled ordinary. Everyone around him said, you'll never make it big. He didn't argue. He just worked quietly, studied every night, dreamed without apology. Years later, that same man became a business leader. When people asked him how he did it, he said, I stopped answering to the label. That's where his power began. Not in money, not in fame, but in the courage to define himself. Every label you carry creates invisible walls around your potential. When you believe you're not talented, you stop trying new things. When you believe you're not loved, you stop opening your heart. When you believe you're not capable, you stop reaching higher. Tearing off the label doesn't mean denying your struggles. It means refusing to let them define you. In daily life, the process is simple but not easy. You might wake up one morning and look in the mirror, still feeling like the same person, still hearing the old voices whispering, you're not enough. But then something inside whispers louder, no, that's not me anymore. And you start doing things differently. You walk taller. You speak with more conviction. You stop apologizing for existing. That's the quiet birth of power. The kind that doesn't need to shout. The kind that speaks through presence. People might not understand this version of you. They might say, you've changed. And you'll smile because you know the truth. You didn't change. You became who you were meant to be all along. They were just too comfortable with your old label to see your new identity. And that's okay. You don't need them to see it. You just need to live it. Sometimes tearing off the label means walking away from people who can't handle your growth. They'll say, you think you're better now, but they don't realize you're not trying to be better than them. You're trying to be better than who you were yesterday. Growth isn't arrogance, it's obedience to your potential. When you honor that calling, you stop shrinking to fit small expectations. There's a woman who once told me she was always called too emotional. People said it like it was an insult. She started hiding her feelings, forcing herself to act cold and detached, thinking it would make her stronger. But it didn't. It made her miserable. One day she decided to stop pretending. She embraced her emotions, used them to fuel her art, her writing, her voice. Those same emotions that were once mocked became her greatest strength. When she tore off the label, too emotional, she found her power in authenticity. Your strength doesn't lie in fitting in. It lies in breaking free. When you stop wearing what doesn't belong to you, you become lighter, faster, freer. Tearing off the label is not an act of rebellion. It's an act of remembrance. You're remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. You're peeling back layers of lies until you find your truth underneath. Think about it like this when you buy a new mirror. It comes with a sticker that says, fragile. But once you hang it up, you remove the sticker because the mirror's purpose is not to stay boxed and protected. It's to reflect. In the same way, you can't live your purpose while still covered by the world's labels. You have to tear them off so you can finally reflect your true power. Every label you shed is a declaration that you're no longer bound by fear. When you rip off the label, unworthy, confidence rushes in. When you tear off broken, healing begins. When you remove failure, opportunity appears. The labels were never protecting you, they were suffocating you. And once they're gone, you start breathing differently. You will know you've begun to grow when peace replaces performance. When silence feels stronger than approval. When your goals are not about proving people wrong, but about proving yourself right. That's the transformation that happens when the false labels fall away. Your power was never missing, it was just buried beneath too many opinions. Every scar, every mistake, every disappointment was never proof of your weakness. It was proof of your survival. And when you recognize that, you stop carrying shame and start carrying wisdom. Tearing off the label doesn't erase your past, it redefines it. It turns every wound into lesson and every lesson into strength. So when life tries to hand you another label, failure, too late, not enough. Look at it, smile, and refuse to wear it. Because power doesn't come from the world calling you worthy. It comes from you believing that you always were. You don't need validation to be valuable. It's a lesson that most people learn too late in life, after chasing approval from everyone around them and discovering that applause is temporary, attention is fleeting, and praise often comes with strings attached. From the moment we are born, society begins to teach us that worth is measured externally. Grades, compliments, promotions, followers, likes, all of these become the scales by which we weigh ourselves. We begin to believe that if people don't see our value, it must not exist. But that is the biggest lie you can ever believe. Your value is not a reflection of recognition. It is an essence that exists independent of the world's opinion. Think about a candle in a dark room. It doesn't wait for someone to notice its flame before it shines. It doesn't ask for permission to give light. It just burns, illuminating the space around it. The moment a candle stops burning because nobody is applauding, the room stays dark. That's how life works. Your contribution, your uniqueness, your gifts are not dependent on someone else validating them. They are meaningful simply because they exist. In daily life, this plays out constantly. A young artist spends hours painting, hoping for praise, for likes, for recognition, only to receive silence. Most would give up, assuming their work has no worth. But the artist who understands value doesn't stop creating because applause didn't come. They continue because their purpose is bigger than validation. The painting is valuable not because others say so, but because it is an authentic expression of their soul. People often sacrifice themselves for recognition, bending, adjusting, performing, all to be accepted, admired, or loved. A student might choose a career path because family or society told them it's prestigious, not because it aligns with their passion. A professional might stay late at work to earn a title rather than build mastery. A young woman might change herself to fit an image of beauty dictated by social media. These actions are rooted in seeking validation, not honoring intrinsic value, and the cost is always self-erosion. Consider a man who spent years in a corporate job he hated because he wanted to be respected. He wore the mask everyone admired, punctual, compliant, ambitious according to their standards, yet every day he felt emptier. Eventually, he realized that respect was never the source of fulfillment. Authenticity was. He left the office, started a small business from scratch, and though the world initially criticized him, he never doubted his worth. The moment he stopped asking for approval, he became unstoppable because his value was no longer dependent on validation. It was self-sustained. We often wait for permission to feel worthy. We wait for someone else to recognize our contributions before believing we matter. But the truth is, your value existed before anyone spoke it, and it will exist long after they forget. The newborn baby in a hospital doesn't need a compliment to be precious. The seed in the dirt doesn't need someone to praise it to grow. Your existence, your talents, your thoughts, your dreams, these are inherently valuable regardless of the acknowledgement you receive. Labels and judgments can make us doubt ourselves. Someone calls you lazy, and suddenly you question your effort. Someone says you're too young, and you hesitate to try. Someone whispers you're not enough, and you retreat into yourself. These are all tests of intrinsic value. The person who knows that their worth is internal will continue to act despite criticism, create despite doubt, and shine despite neglect. Look around in life. How many people stop chasing their dreams because they never received the applause they expected? A writer never publishes a manuscript because no one said good job. A musician doesn't practice because no one complimented the melody. A student stops learning because no one noticed their effort. Yet their value wasn't lessened by the absence of recognition. It was always present, waiting for them to acknowledge it themselves. You must internalize this truth. The world's recognition is not the measure of your significance. What matters is how you see yourself, how you treat yourself, and how committed you are to fulfilling your purpose. When your worth is internalized, the opinions, compliments, or criticisms of others become mere background noise. They may influence your environment, but they cannot define your essence. Imagine a gardener planting flowers in a neglected lot. No one sees him working. No one applauds. Years later, the lot blooms, filling the street with color and fragrance. The world may never know the gardener's name, but does that diminish the value of the beauty he created? No. The flowers exist as a testimony of effort, vision, and intrinsic value. Similarly, your contributions do not require recognition to matter. The moment you stop seeking validation, your energy is redirected from pleasing others to becoming yourself. You start setting boundaries because you recognize your time and efforts are valuable. You start pursuing goals because they align with your purpose, not because someone will cheer. You start speaking your truth because your voice carries weight independent of applause. Living for validation is exhausting. Living for value is empowering. Every great person in history understood this. Their worth was never contingent on immediate recognition. The scientist who worked in obscurity for years, the artist whose masterpiece was ignored during their lifetime, the leader who faced ridicule, all understood that value is intrinsic. They worked, they created, they persevered not for applause, but because they were aware of the importance of their work and the truth of their existence. So in daily life, you can test this principle. When someone dismisses your idea, does your conviction fade or does it grow stronger? When no one cheers for your progress, do you stop moving or do you move anyway? When a room ignores your presence, do you shrink or do you continue showing up? The answers define whether you live dependent on validation or anchored in self-value. You don't need a trophy to know you've achieved. You don't need compliments to know you've tried. You don't need attention to know you're contributing. The world's approval is transient, fickle, and sometimes blind. Your intrinsic value is enduring, unshakable, and evident in every choice you make to honor yourself, to persist, to grow, and to shine despite neglect. Once you accept that your worth is not tied to recognition, life changes. You are no longer at the mercy of opinion, the sway of criticism, or the scarcity of praise. You act from power, not permission. You create from abundance, not anxiety. You love yourself without bargaining, and you move toward your purpose without hesitation. Your value was never borrowed. It was always yours to claim. Every morning, remind yourself that you exist first and the world exists second. Your dreams, your efforts, your gifts, They are valuable because they are yours. When you live anchored in internal value, you become untouchable by judgment, unstoppable by doubt, and unshakable by neglect, because you finally understand that validation is optional, but your worth is absolute. Your destiny begins where their definition ends. For far too long, people have allowed the voices around them to write the script of their lives. They grow up hearing what they can't do, what they're not capable of, what they'll never achieve, and they begin to live inside those limitations. A teacher says you're not smart enough, and you stop trying. A parent doubts your dreams, and you shrink. A friend mocks your ideas, and you silence your own voice. Slowly, without even realizing it, you hand over your future to other people's imagination as if their fear could determine your potential. But destiny is not written by other people. It is written by the courage to step beyond their limits. Every day, people define themselves by the boxes others create. They wear labels like average, weak, ordinary, and carry them as though they were their identity. They stay in jobs they hate because someone said they weren't ambitious enough to take risks. They stay in relationships that drain them because someone implied they could never find better. They let someone else's definition of their worth dictate the boundaries of their life. But destiny doesn't live in the smallness of someone else's imagination. It lives in the vastness of your own belief. Think about a young man who loved to write stories as a child. His teachers told him writing would never make him money. His peers laughed at him, saying he should focus on something practical. He internalized their judgment and put away his notebooks, convincing himself he wasn't meant for creativity. Years later, when he finally picked up the pen again, he found that the stories were still alive inside him. He published his first book, and it became a bestseller. He realized his destiny had been waiting patiently, even while he had been living according to someone else's definition. The moment he ignored their limits, he began to live his own purpose. Destiny requires courage because it asks you to break free from what is familiar. The familiar is comfortable because it's predictable. Living according to other people's definition is easy. It is a kind of safety. You know the rules, you know the expectations, you know the judgments. But the moment you step beyond those rules, the moment you step outside their expectations, fear rises. Fear is not a sign to stop. It is a signal that you are entering territory where your purpose can finally unfold. In daily life, this is happening everywhere. A young woman wants to start her own business, but everyone around her says she's too young, too inexperienced, too naive. She could listen and stay in her safe 9 to 5, living a life that was comfortable but unremarkable. Or she could step past the definition they gave her, take the risk, and build something that only she could imagine. Those who choose the second path find that when they live outside other people's definitions, they discover strength, creativity, and resilience they never knew existed. People often confuse guidance with limitation. Someone giving advice may not intend to stop you from growing, but when you let their words become chains, you allow them to define your reality. Destiny begins when you separate advice from authority, when you realize that their perception is not your permission. No one can authorize your potential. No one can dictate the reach of your dreams. The limits others place on you exist only in the space between their imagination and your action. Consider a student who was always called slow by his teachers. Every test, every exam, every grade was a reminder that others had already decided his capability. He could have accepted that label and lived a life of mediocrity, but he chose differently. He spent extra hours learning, practicing, questioning, and growing. In time, he not only caught up, he excelled beyond those who doubted him. His destiny began precisely where their definition ended, in the space where they said he could not go. Living outside other people's definitions requires patience. You will encounter doubt, criticism, and sometimes ridicule. The world does not always welcome those who refuse to fit inside the lines, but destiny is not about pleasing the world, it is about fulfilling the call within you. Every rejection, every insult, every disbelief becomes fuel for your journey. The words that were meant to limit you become the very evidence that you were built for more. The truth is that people's definitions are temporary, but your destiny is permanent. They will change their minds, change their opinions, and forget what they said. But destiny is not a conversation, it is a calling. When you focus on what others think, you remain a passenger in your own life, traveling on someone else's map. When you focus on your purpose, you become the navigator, steering toward a horizon only you can see. Think of the inventors The artists, the leaders, the people whose names you admire today, every single one of them was told they couldn't, that they shouldn't, that it was impossible. The difference between them and the crowd that listened is simple. They chose to step beyond other people's definitions. They built their lives in the space that was empty because others refused to imagine it. Destiny always exists beyond limitation, beyond opinion, beyond the know of the world. In practical life, this looks like making choices that feel risky but right, saying yes to opportunities that scare you and no to expectations that suffocate you. It looks like waking up early to work on what others said was useless, speaking boldly when others whisper, creating despite criticism, and believing despite doubt. The moment you do this, you begin to inhabit a life that is yours, not borrowed from someone else's imagination. Your destiny is not in the past, it is in the decision to step beyond the definitions imposed on you. The moment you stop being constrained by labels, opinions, and judgments, you step into the field where your purpose can run freely. The moment you stop asking for permission to live, to dream, to create, to love, you claim the territory that has always been waiting for you. Every person faces this choice multiple times a day. Will you stay within the limits of what others say you can do, or will you move into the space where only your courage defines you? Destiny is not for those who conform, it is for those who refuse to be boxed. It begins when you walk past the words that tried to stop you, when you act in alignment with your vision rather than their expectation, when you live boldly in the truth of your own calling. Even in small things, destiny is revealed where definition ends. A child who refuses to believe they are not good at sports and keeps practicing. A young musician who plays despite being told they lack talent. An employee who speaks up with ideas even when others dismiss them. Each small act of defiance against imposed definition is a step toward destiny. Every step beyond someone else's limit is an inch closer to who you were meant to become. The power of this principle is that once you understand it, life changes. You stop living to fit someone else's script. You start building your story in the space that was always empty because the world never imagined it. You no longer apologize for ambition, no longer doubt your instincts, no longer shrink in the shadow of someone else's fear. Destiny begins where their definition ends, and your life will never be the same once you step into that space. As we reach this moment together, I want you to truly feel what it means to reclaim your life from the labels, the opinions, the judgments that have tried to define you. For too long, you have allowed words that were never meant for you to cage your spirit, to dictate your worth, to limit your potential. But today, I want you to understand that your story does not belong to anyone else. Your destiny, your greatness, your power, they have always been inside you, waiting for the moment you stop listening to the noise and start hearing your own voice. Life will always give you reasons to believe that you are less than, that you are ordinary, that you are not enough. But the truth is far greater than any lie ever spoken over you. Remember, the world will try to tell you what you can't do, but your heart will always know what you must. They may call you weak, unworthy, incapable, average, but inside there is a fire that cannot be extinguished. That fire is your spirit, your identity, your divine design, and the only thing standing between you and your breakthrough is the courage to embrace it. Every great man, every great woman, every leader, every innovator you admire started in the same place. Doubted, overlooked, underestimated, yet they chose to rise above the labels. Their story was not written by others. It was written by their commitment to their own purpose. You must choose to write your story the same way. I want you to think about this. How many times have you limited yourself because someone else did not believe in you? How many opportunities have you let pass because someone told you you weren't ready, strong enough, smart enough, or deserving enough? Today, I want you to release all of that. The moment you stop answering to their limitations, your potential begins to expand. The moment you refuse to carry their doubts, your power awakens. The moment you silence the opinions that were never yours to carry, your voice becomes unstoppable. No one can define your path. No one can set your limits. No one can decide your worth. Only you. Life will test you, and it will continue to offer moments that challenge your belief in yourself. You will face critics, naysayers, and even people who love you but don't understand your vision. They will try to put the old label back on you, to remind you of who they thought you were, to pull you into the smallness of their expectations. But remember, courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is moving forward in spite of it. Every step you take beyond their definition is a step into the greatness that is waiting for you. Every action you take aligned with your truth is a declaration that you will no longer live under someone else's script. I want you to see yourself the way you were meant to be seen: limitless, powerful, courageous, and worthy. Imagine the life you have always dreamed of, the achievements you have always wanted, the purpose you have always known you were born to fulfill. Now understand this. The only reason those dreams seem distant is because you've been looking at the world through the wrong lens, the lens of opinion, judgment, and limitation. When you shift your focus inward, when you anchor your belief in your own identity, those dreams do not remain distant. They move closer with every decision you make, every risk you take, every label you tear off. Think about the stories of people who refuse to be defined by their circumstances. Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team and called a failure, yet he went on to become the greatest. Oprah Winfrey was told she would never succeed, yet she built an empire. Thomas Edison failed thousands of times before he illuminated the world. Their lives prove a single truth: it is not what others say about you. It is what you believe about yourself that determines your destiny. Your failures do not define you, your persistence does. Your struggles do not define you, your resilience does. Your worth was never in question, it was only waiting for you to recognize it. You must understand that the labels you have carried, the criticisms you have internalized, the doubts you have believed, they are all illusions that lose power the moment you claim your authority. No one can tell you who you are. No one can limit your greatness. No one can rewrite your story but you. And so I challenge you to rise today. Rise above fear, rise above judgment, rise above limitation. Rise to the call that is echoing in your soul, whispering, you are more than they ever imagined. In your journey, you will encounter moments where giving up seems easier, where the voices of doubt are louder than your own inner voice. But remember, the greatest achievements are born from the moments when others said you couldn't, when the path was uncertain, when everything seemed impossible. Each challenge is an invitation to demonstrate that their labels have no power over your purpose. When you step forward in faith, when you act with courage, when you refuse to settle for less than your calling, you are proving that your destiny begins where their definition ends. The power to transform your life is in your hands. Every choice you make, every action you take, every thought you cultivate has the ability to either reinforce the old labels or shatter them completely. Choose to shatter them. Choose to see yourself not through the eyes of the world, but through the eyes of possibility. Choose to embrace the truth of your potential, the truth of your worth, the truth of your calling. The moment you do, everything changes. Your life, your confidence, your dreams, and the way the world perceives you will never be the same. Remember the words of those who have inspired generations. Believe you can, and you're halfway there. The only limit to our realization of tomorrow will be our doubts of today. Success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. And don't let yesterday take up too much of today. These words are not just phrases, they are reminders that your life, your future, and your destiny belong to you and you alone. When you embrace them, when you live them, when you make them your truth, you awaken a force that no label, no opinion, and no limitation can touch. So today I ask you to rise. Rise from the weight of expectation, rise from the chains of opinion, rise from the fear that has held you back. Rise into the power, the purpose, and the greatness that have always been yours. Walk boldly, speak confidently, and live authentically, knowing that every step you take is a declaration that you are not what they said. You are far greater than they ever imagined, and your destiny is waiting for you to claim it. The moment you stop living for validation, the moment you tear off every false label, the moment you step fully into your potential, you create a life that is unstoppable, undeniable, and unforgettable. You become a living testament that no one else can define your story, no one else can limit your worth, and no one else can decide the power you carry within. The world may still try to judge, still try to label, still try to confine, but you now move in the freedom of self-belief, the certainty of purpose, and the unstoppable force of a soul that knows its value. Embrace that truth, carry it in every heartbeat, and let it guide you in every decision, every step, and every dream. Let it remind you daily that you are capable, you are worthy, you are powerful, and you were never born to be small. Let it remind you that you can rise above fear, rise above doubt, rise above judgment, and live a life so extraordinary that it makes the labels that once tried to define you feel irrelevant, powerless, and insignificant. Your life is yours to define. Your potential is yours to unleash. Your destiny is yours to claim. Walk into it with courage, step into it with confidence, and never allow anyone or anything to make you forget the greatness that is already within you. The labels are lies, the doubts are illusions. The fear is temporary, and the power inside you is eternal, unwavering, and unstoppable. Rise and let the world witness the truth of who you are.